So in economics, there are different theories of value. I'm going to talk about three main ones today that kind of pretty much get around the idea of what most people think and then talk about their strengths and weaknesses. And so and a lot of people intuit these to be the ways of determining value. But just starting off from the basics, so economics is the study of how human action impacts scarce resources that have alternative uses. So it's human mean action, meaning we make decisions, we use means and thinking, and we have to deal in the reality of scarce resources. There are limits, we want more than there is, and we have to deal with what's available. And those scarce resources have alternative uses. So we have to deal with the problem of how to allocate those in the right amounts without waste, but also while meeting needs. That's the problem of economics. In doing that, there is an effective, though imperfect, way of coming to that coordinates the system, and that comes from prices, which are a network of signals that indicate whether something is more or less available in an economy. So a higher price indicates higher demand on the same amount of scarce resources, meaning a higher price is telling us that something is less available, either because it's literally less available, there's less of that good or service, or it's less available because more people are demanding it at the same time, or both. And a lower price indicates to us that an item, good or service, is more plentiful, and that there are less people demanding it at the same time, or both, other things being equal. And there are other things that can change. There's supply that can change of something, and the prices communicate that information, and they help us deal with the reality of scarcity through our normal responses to prices, where if a price is higher, we buy less generally, or we buy the same amount and make other decisions elsewhere. Dude on a motorcycle comes by. And if a price is lower, we're incentivized to buy more in general and use more because something is more abundant. But when coming to the idea of prices, we have to ask, where do prices come from? What justifies a price? What does a price indicate? And that's where we come to theories of value. So the first theory of value, these aren't in particular order historically or anything, but they're just different theories of how valuation works. So if we're like valuing, it could be any good or service, like a pen, that comes to be its price. The first theory I'll talk about is the labor theory of value. And this is kind of more of the Marxian labor theory, although he's not the only one who articulated this. And it has some points to it of validity. And the idea of the labor theory of value is basically that a good or service, the value of a good or service, is determined by the labor that was put into it. For example, there's things out here in nature. Okay, look, there's these trees. That itself does not have a price right now. I mean, if we're just truly out in nature. Therefore, the labor of interacting with this and manipulating it, making it into something else, let's say lumber or something, determines the price. And so and no more or no less. So you're not allowed, in Marx's worldview, to charge extra beyond what it cost you to produce for profit, because he believed that was a form of extortion or theft, especially if you were a business working and you were gaining profit, what he believed in a way that was exploitative. Okay, but the idea behind all that is that really people's labor should determine the price. Now we're in a problem there because I use the word should. Economics is supposed to be a value-free science, meaning you don't use normative terms like should or ought. So there's one issue with the labor theory of value is that it's somewhat normative. Another challenge with the labor theory of value is that how do you really determine what price to put on labor? Because it's like, okay, I can do an hour of work clearing this field with a rake, or I could do an hour of work cutting hair. Same dude. But are both of those hours equivalent of the work done? Or I guess, there are different amounts of labor produced. How many heads of hair did you cut during that time, and all those things? So it's kind of hard to determine what the right price of labor actually is. And we'll talk about another aspect of the labor theory of value, another challenge to it, in just a second when I get to the third one. The second one, which is what a lot of people follow, that it builds, it has some connection with first. It acknowledges a place for valuing things because of labor. And it's true. I mean, the time or energy and labor work that we put into something is part of this whole kind of network. But the second theory is that value comes from what I call input costs. So for example, if I'm going to build a house, I have to buy lumber, I have to buy nails, I have to use time, I have to use resources, and there's a cost of putting that all together, and that contributes to the price, which is valid insofar as it goes too, because if I do all that work, it wouldn't make sense for me to charge less than what it cost me to build the house. There's actually a distinction between cost and price. Cost is what it takes to do something or what you gave up in order to make something happen. Price is what you pay for something on the market. So if I built the house and it cost me X amount of dollars, that is kind of part of the price, because X amount of dollars, I can't charge less than that or else I'm losing money. So input costs. The problem with the input cost theory of valuation is pretty simple, even though this theory seems to make some sense. And this was a theory kind of followed somewhat by like Adam Smith and others, that, okay, well, the costs that go into something, that helps determine the price. And that's kind of true. I don't think it totally gets at the core of where value comes from yet. The problem is, if you work everything back, it comes to what is I call the turtle problem. The turtle problem is this. There's this ancient Indian myth of what does the earth sit on top of? Okay, the earth hangs on nothing, but this is where the myth goes, that the earth sits on top of the back of a turtle. But at one point, a child asked, okay, well, what does that turtle stand on top of? I said, another turtle. And then, you can see the infinite regression here. And somebody said it's turtles all the way down. But it's like, well, all the way down to what? There has to be some sort of end there. So anyway, the input cost theory has a similar problem. If you strip back any good or service, you take the goods that it took to make a bag of chips, okay? You've got the bag, you've got the manufacturing equipment to make the chips, you've got the raw ingredients, okay? The cost of a potato out of the ground may have a cost, but I mean, if you just go back to the raw materials that are available on the earth that came together through human action to create the potato chip in its bag and all that stuff, you end up with this issue. When I go and grab here a handful of dirt, raw material, there's no price. I mean, unless somebody owns the dirt and they charge me for it, there's no price of this stuff. So yes, while there's an input cost, there does take time, energy, and resources for me to take raw materials and make something out of them. That's totally true. But it doesn't really explain where prices come from and what prices should be. So, labor theory of value has those problems. The input cost theory has those problems. And then we come to subjective valuation. Subjective valuation accepts the true aspects of the previous two theories of value, but it adds another hugely important element. There's this video that I show in economics class it's a clip from Family Guy, which you shouldn't watch. But Stewie, the baby in it, he makes a drawing. He gives it to his parents, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is cool. We're gonna put it on the fridge." Then he walks away, and his parents start making fun of the drawing and saying how bad it is and how dumb it is. And then Stewie hears them, and he cries or whatever. And it's meant to be funny. It's probably funnier than it sounds on the actual show. Okay, and you can look up that clip on YouTube. I use it in economics, and that illustrates the labor theory. The subjective valuation theory, which is you can ask for whatever price you want, but until someone agrees with you to pay that price, you don't really have a price yet. See, I could have a house and just try and say, my house costs $1.2 million. Now that's fine. I can ask for whatever price that I want for this house, but somebody has to agree with me to pay the price. So, we have another example. Say there's this person who wants to ask someone out on a date. And in this individual's mind, the asker, this individual believes themselves to be a 10. The face, the body, the making the money, the brains. But if the other person does not agree with their self-valuation, they can still say no to the date. It doesn't matter what the price offered is, so to speak. So, the consumer of a product, or consumers, as it's probably more likely to be, have to determine the price. But not all consumers agree. For example, on Amazon, you can look up and buy a pet rock. And it comes in a little box, comes in some fake grass, it has a certificate printed out of being an official pet rock. Now for me, I would not purchase that. But someone else obviously does. And it's about $19.95 on Amazon. So for me, the price is $0. For someone else, the price is maybe $19.95. Now, if they charged $100 for it, less people would buy it. Maybe no one would buy it. But someone somewhere at that $19.95 price will purchase pet rock. Now, why is it possible that my valuation of pet rock and the valuation of other people who do want pet rock, why are our valuations different? Well, they're different because our valuations are subjective. Economics doesn't judge in a value way either of our valuations of a good or service. It just recognizes that we want things, that we rank them in order of want and need, and that we will have differences of opinion. But in doing that, our demand for goods and services is what factors into the price. Because if there wasn't that demand, a price would not be possible. So really, it's the consumer that decides what the price of a good or service is. I should say the consumers, plural, working together and competing for the same amount of resources on the consumer side, but also competing for the same amount of customers on the producer side. There's upward pressure put on the price from the consumer side of those trying to get the resources, and there's downward pressure put on the price from the producer side who are competing for the dollars of the consumer. And so that's where prices come from, that network of different interactions. But it really comes down to what particular human beings choose subjectively to value. And why do they choose it? It's up to them. They're the only ones who know.